Oh, well, that's good then. My grandmother said, but I couldn't really understand the meaning of her words. After taking my talented brother with them, my parents left this house. Because I'm stupid, I was the only one left behind. Now everyone's gone, and I'm lonely and all alone. Was I abandoned by my mom and dad? Yet, my grandmother raised me with deep affection. Delicious food and warm smiles. I learned how happy it is to be accepted just as I am. Then, after living freely for over 20 years, my parents appeared before me. They came back after seeing me, now an accomplished researcher, in the media. They didn't hide their desires, approaching me with an ugly smile. I felt a boiling anger inside, witnessing their actions. Seeing them in such a desperate situation due to their own actions. The sight of them with their vile smiles, uttering words of fake praise like "you're amazing," or frantically spitting while screaming a daughter has a duty to help her parents, was so repulsive that it was hard to put my feelings into words. I felt an intense boiling sensation inside me, while my mind seemed to become sharper. These people haven't changed at all. They believe only their values are correct, using them to justify excluding others and rationalizing any kind of tyranny. Without a thought for the people they hurt. Don't make me laugh. Coming to me now, just because you need something. So, I won't hold back anymore. I've already been walking my own path in life. I can't think of people who neglected me my whole life as family. I have no attachment to them. The time had come to tell my parents what I had always wanted to say. I renounce all inheritance and declare estrangement. I'm Jessica. A 29-year-old researcher. Ever since I was young, I loved playing outside, running around in mud, puddles, and sandpits until I was covered in dirt. When my science teacher talked about microorganisms, the idea of something invisible yet present fascinated me. Though invisible to the naked eye, each looked completely different under a microscope. I wanted to see things I'd never seen before, so I asked for a picture book from the bookstore, but it wasn't enough. We didn't have a microscope at home, and I couldn't always use one at school. Seeing my disappointment, my teacher taught me about the work of microorganisms. For example, they eat fallen leaves and live in mud. Since leaves and mud were easy to find, I ended up getting muddy while playing outside as I searched for the results of microorganisms' activity. Jessica, why do you always dirty your clothes? How many times do I have to tell you the same thing? My mother would scold me every time I came home with dirty clothes. But I'd forget when I was playing. Especially, my mother wanted me to engage in more traditionally feminine activities. She would say, "You're a girl, so wear a dress and play house." Playing outside isn't something girls should do. Because I preferred the exact opposite kind of play, I often got scolded by her. My tendency to get absorbed in things to the point of ignoring everything else was a problem at school too. During home visits, my teacher would comment, "Jessica often has trouble concentrating in class and can be found daydreaming. She gets easily distracted by things and tends to lose focus." My mother would smile awkwardly, apologize, and gently tell me, "Let's study hard." But as soon as the teacher left, she'd pull my arm and yell at me in a shrill voice. But I just found classes boring. The classes were often hard to follow, with teachers just rattling off content as they pleased, so I, just listening, would get bored. Then my mind would wander to more interesting things. That's how it felt. That's why my test scores were always hit or miss. I'd score near perfect on some, and then end up in the 20s on others. My inconsistency meant my report card was a mixed bag. The teachers at school would say, "It's way better to have interests, even if it means varying effort, than to have none at all." But having even one subject below average was unforgivable to my parents. They'd throw my report card aside with disgust, saying, "A fool has no place in this house." My parents were always boasting about their own excellence. My mom, a teacher at a competitive high school, took pride in having attended a university with high academic standards. She believed that good grades and getting into a top university were necessary for a great life. I noticed that people around her were somewhat put off by her rigid values, but my mom either didn't realize it or didn't care, even if she was told. In today's world, it's an educational society where you graduated from matters a lot. Anyone who doesn't get that is just a sore loser. It would have been better if she just looked down on others, but she was aggressive towards anyone with a differing opinion, so it was best to avoid conflict. My dad was similar. He graduated from medical school and became a medical researcher, often talking about his work at the university hospital and writing papers. He firmly believed academic background defined a person's worth, often demeaning patients and faculty from other departments based on their alma maters. So, to them, my situation was embarrassingly unacceptable. Unfortunately, I had a brother who was the exact opposite of me. He was the perfect child my parents wanted, obeying them and excelling in school. He got luxurious, nutrition-focused meals and high-quality clothes. I was the opposite. My meals were leftovers from what my brother and parents had. My clothes were either too small or hand-me-downs from my brother. Once I started prioritizing outdoor play over house play, the frequency of getting new clothes dropped significantly. My brother and I were treated differently based on our parents' values. But I still loved my brother, and he was kind to me. My brother, burdened with a ton of workbooks from our parents, was always at his study desk, but he'd help me with my homework and even share his snacks with me, knowing I didn't get any. We both understood, without saying it, that it wasn't wise to go against our parents. The worst came when I was 9. My parents, busy with their work and my brother's education, gradually treated me as if I were invisible. "Fend for yourself," my parents said, and they stopped preparing my meals. While my parents and brother were eating, I was locked in my room under the pretext of doing homework. I was allowed out when my brother went to take a bath, and then I would eat whatever I could find in the refrigerator. For clothes, I wore whatever was clean and available. However, my muddy clothes were often rejected even from the laundry and left on the floor. Conspicuously, a tablet was placed, showing videos on how to use the washing machine, and I learned to do my laundry by watching them. I remember feeling relieved that nobody commented when I managed it myself. There were days when I didn't see my parents at all. They were always busy with work, and on their days off, they focused on my brother. Even if we crossed paths inside the house, there was no eye contact. No response to my attempts at conversation. So, I gradually stopped trying to talk, and my parents continued to ignore my existence even more. They read all the school handouts and provided everything I needed for school. So, I just thought that was how things were supposed to be. I guess my teachers, being colleagues of my mother, didn't think she would go to such lengths. There was never any communication about it. Then one day, when I came back from school, I found a note on the living room table in our deserted house. "Your brother is going to a new school. We've made this house livable for you." At first, I didn't understand. I had heard from my brother himself that he might be transferring to another school. It seemed it wasn't final at that time, but I guess my parents had arranged everything. But the note said they had made the house livable for me. I read it over and over until I finally realized that I was being left behind. My parents were going with my brother, leaving the house for me, implying that they didn't need me. When I realized that, tears started to roll down my cheeks. I was just so sad. Because I wasn't good at studies. Because I didn't obey. Because I dirtied my clothes. No matter how hard I tried to get my parents' attention, doing good things and behaving well, once I did something wrong in their eyes, I was completely ignored. So, I was abandoned, and that fact was unbearably sad. I cried out loud, wailing. As it got dark outside and I grew tired of crying, I started to think again. It's impossible for a 9-year-old child to live alone. Even if I had a house, what about food? Without money, I couldn't do anything. And I didn't want to be alone. Then I remembered. When I was little, I used to visit my grandparents often. They were my mother's parents, and I often stayed at their house. My grandmother worked as a caretaker at a foster home, a short drive away, and I have memories of going there with her. There were many kids my age, and I'm sure we played together. I think it was the year before last, my grandfather passed away, and my grandmother started living alone in that big house. At that time, my mother and grandmother had some kind of falling out, and I stopped going to my grandparents' house or seeing my grandmother. My grandmother was alone too. With that thought, I desperately searched for my grandmother's contact information. All I remembered was my mother's maiden name, my grandmother's last name. Relying on just that, I searched desperately all over the house and finally found it. In an old handwritten contact book under the landline phone. There was my grandmother's last name and phone number. I had never made a phone call myself before. But it was like clutching at straws. I pushed the numbers on the contact book, but realized I needed to lift the receiver for it to work after doing it 3 times. I picked up the receiver, pressed it to my ear, and dialed the number. I heard the ringing tone, and after a few rings, the line clicked, cutting off the sound. Yes, hello? Grandma. Jessica. Grandma! She immediately recognized it was me and, right there on the phone, I managed to explain the situation I was in. Then, Grandma said, "I'll come right away," and hung up. Soon after, she came to pick me up in her car. When she saw me as I opened the front door to greet her, she seemed to catch her breath. She must have been shocked by my shabby appearance, but I was too filled with relief to care. There she was, the kind grandmother I remembered, right in front of me. I was so happy, I just threw myself into her arms. "Your beautiful hair, and your clothes." As she hugged me tightly, Grandma said this, stroking my hair. Her touch was so gentle, it made me even happier. "Come on, grab what you need, and let's go to my place," Grandma said, patting my back. She was taking me to live with her. Yeah. Mom and Dad, they're not coming back, are they? I hesitated for a moment, feeling as if leaving this house would truly sever my ties with my family. Even though I had just cried so much about being abandoned. But still, there was a part of me that was clinging to hope. I'm just a silly girl they didn't want. Well, isn't that good? Grandma said. I didn't understand what she meant by that and looked up at her. You're free now, Jessica. You're free. What do you want to eat? I'll make it. What do you want? What do you want to do? Free. Of course, we'll have some basic rules since we'll be living together. Just to make sure neither of us feels bad or has a hard time, okay? Yeah. Apart from that, you're free. Do lots of things you like, have fun. That's what you can do now. Her words warmed something inside me. Being free to have fun. I wasn't quite sure what that life would be like, but an exciting expectation was growing inside me. Afterward, I moved in with my grandma and transferred to a new school. It was a peaceful rural area where Grandma lived, and the school was small with few students. Maybe because of that, being a new student was a novelty, and everyone was kind to me. The teachers paid close attention to each student, and I no longer got scolded like before. Jessica, you have things you like, that's great. Research the things you're interested in. There should be books in the library. But remember, balance is important. Pay attention in class, finish your homework. Then you can do lots of things you like. Everyone accepted me. They helped me when I didn't understand something. They didn't deny who I was. I think before, I was never really seen for who I am. But now, they just naturally accepted me as I am. So, I started to smile a lot more. And near Grandma's house, it was like a treasure trove for me. It was a place where ancient fossils and buried forests had been discovered, and although no major excavation work was being done now, remnants must still be there. Above all, I wondered what kind of microorganisms had lived and worked in that land. What kind of effects did they have? What were the layers of the earth like? Did different things live in each layer? There was so much I wanted to know. Every day, I got covered in mud, running around exploring everywhere. Once, while digging out of curiosity, I found something like a fossil and was thrilled. Every day was exciting, full of discoveries, and fulfilling. I naturally came to think that this was something I wanted to continue doing for a long time. 20 years have passed since my parents left me behind. Now, at 29, I'm working in a research job, specializing in biology. Raised by my grandmother, after high school, I went on to college for 4 years to earn my bachelor's degree, followed by a master's and doctorate, totaling another 4 years. I successfully defended my doctoral thesis and obtained my PhD, landing a job at a well-regarded research institute right out of school. Right after taking me in, my grandmother somehow got in touch with my mother and insisted she pay for my education and upbringing. Naturally, my mother was reluctant, but Grandma threatened to consult child services, the police, and hire a lawyer to sue her if she didn't fulfill her obligations. Worried about their reputation, my parents begrudgingly transferred the bare minimum amount of money to my grandmother. Of course, that wasn't enough for tuition, so I used grant-type scholarships and honors student programs to complete my studies as quickly as possible. Now, I'm working on things I've always been interested in, like fossil excavation, understanding the conditions and age of the land, making my life quite fulfilling. Although research institutes are known for their excessive overtime, often exceeding 100 hours a month, I don't differentiate between working hours and overtime. I research to satisfy my curiosity. I use numerous methods to find answers. It feels like there's just not enough time for the simple act of learning. Of course, some colleagues have left, unable to endure this environment, but for me, the job is enjoyable without any hardship. Being nicknamed a physical and mental powerhouse at work is something I take as a compliment. Having been denied the chance to do what I wanted and my feelings negated in the past, I relish the opportunity to delve into my interests and make new discoveries in this job. Since childhood, I've been intensely interested in one thing, which often became a target of criticism from adults, but now, I can use this trait effectively in my work. My grandmother helped me learn how to manage this trait, turning it into a strength that I could use as my weapon. As a result, I understood how to study efficiently, improving my grades. I did well in my entrance exams and could fully utilize this trait in my research. I organize and prioritize multiple tasks in my head, completing them one by one. The sensation of my brain nearly boiling over as I scrutinize information and find answers brings an indescribable pleasure. This job is indeed suited for me. Recently, I received an award from a prestigious society for discovering and elucidating the unique functions of a rare microorganism found in the sand samples I analyzed during an overseas fossil excavation. It all started with my curiosity about why this microorganism was present in that particular stratum. As I unraveled the mystery through research, I learned about its critical role in evolution, prompting me to quickly write and submit a paper. This discovery kept me abroad longer than expected, and I got tied up in non-research related meetings and media interviews, consuming extra time, but I managed to return to the States. Just when I thought I could return to the Institute to continue my other research, I was ordered by the director to take a few days off as a reward, delaying my plans. Since these opportunities are rare and there's not much else to do, I decided to visit my grandmother. So, I headed straight to her place from the airport. You've been busy again, haven't you? Not really. It's more that the non-work stuff is bothersome. Ah, I saw you on TV. That party. You were wearing such a lovely dress. I was just dressed up and made up against my will. You looked like a completely different person than the usual Jessica. I was just tired. Grandma's pumpkin stew is still the best. That's good to hear. If you want more, help yourself. Sure. Arriving at my grandmother's house, I relaxed in the living room with her delicious pumpkin stew and tea. Grandma still lives alone in this house, and although she's getting on in years, she remains active, working in the garden. I hope she stays healthy and energetic for a long time. Just then, the doorbell rang. Huh? The mail? That's unusual. My grandmother stood up and headed towards the entrance. Since I was little, this area has always been sparsely populated. The neighbors, who know each family's composition, rarely use the intercom for visits due to their close-knit nature. Even now, the only people who diligently ring the doorbell are delivery personnel. Since my grandmother never uses online shopping, I was wondering what could have been delivered. I could hear the sound of her slippers scraping the floor and the front door opening. I thought Grandma would return immediately after receiving the package, but she didn't come back right away. Instead, there seemed to be some commotion at the entrance. Sensing the uneasy atmosphere, I decided to go to the entrance myself. Ah, Jessica! As I left the living room and peeked down the hallway to the entrance, I heard someone calling my name. Behind my turning grandmother, at the door, stood a man and a woman. It was the woman who had called my name. Jessica, I'm so glad. I wanted to see you. Ah, Jessica. Come here. At first, I didn't recognize them. After all, it had been 20 years since I last saw them. The two people, desperately calling my name with forced, ugly smiles, were my significantly aged father and mother. Why are they here? What do they want? After 20 years of no contact. After they abandoned me 20 years ago. Karen! You and John have no face to show Jessica. My grandmother raised her voice at my mother. Just stay out of it, Mom. Jessica is my daughter. You never acted like a parent, how dare you? Jessica, come here. Let's celebrate. You've done well. My parents exclaimed in unison, still yelling. Observing my parents' commotion, I realized they knew about my recent award. They probably didn't expect me to be here, but the only connection they had to me was through my grandmother. So, they came here, and by a stroke of bad luck for me, or good luck for them, they found me visiting. "Keep it down, you're disturbing the neighbors," I stated firmly, and my parents stiffened and closed their mouths. They seemed to be somewhat aware of their absurd behavior. "I won't let you inside the house. Just explain briefly why you are here. If you make any more noise or trouble, I'll call the police right away. Now, speak." When I urged them to talk, my parents exchanged glances and then began their story. Things changed for my brother after he entered college. He got into one of the top universities, as my parents had hoped, but there he encountered values different from those of our parents for the first time. Bright students have strong wills and aspirations. Seeing his peers pursuing various dreams, my brother began to doubt the academic elitism he had been indoctrinated with, and grew to despise our parents' abnormal obsession with educational credentials. My brother disappeared during his senior year of college, leaving a note saying, "Don't look for me." He's still missing to this day. After being abandoned by my brother, who they had invested so much time, effort, and money in, my parents went on a spending spree in their turmoil. To me, it made no sense, but maybe they were trying to fill the void of loneliness with other things. I wanted to say they should have been more concerned about my brother, but I realized once again these people couldn't possibly have such feelings. Naturally, their savings dwindled, and it impacted their real lives. They started lashing out at others at their workplaces. My mother, a teacher, was overly strict with her students and excessively interfered with their futures, eventually causing several students to stop attending school. She also harassed and verbally abused younger colleagues, leading to recordings of her actions being submitted to the Education Board, resulting in disciplinary action. Both parents are being threatened with lawsuits by lawyers from both sides. My father, too, behaved similarly. Looking down on colleagues with lower educational backgrounds, he made unbearable remarks and acted high-handedly. Not only that, but he also treated hospital patients in the same manner, and even made advances towards female patients he fancied. It seems he'll soon be facing legal issues for that as well. I felt they had reached their limit, with no one to stop them. My parents, with tears in their eyes, explained their situation and then leaned towards me. "Jessica, we want to live together, as a family, supporting each other. Right? You were really our daughter after all. You've done so well. Yes, amazing. You must be famous in your field by now. With fame comes authority. From now on, support each other? What do you mean?" That was an unforgivable remark. Support each other? Now, after all this time? But we're family. I interrupted my parents' words with a question, shocking them. "Family? What do you mean by that?" "What do you mean?" "We might share genes, but we're not a family, are we?" "Why would you say that?" My mother's voice grew louder, trying to stop me. I even felt a sense of nostalgia in that unchanged voice of hers. And then I realized, I'm not afraid of them anymore. Not even a little bit. Also, stop twisting things to your convenience. You're only here because you're facing huge compensations you can't pay, right? You're relying on me? But is it because my brother is gone, and now it's my turn? Or is it because you've run out of money to the point where you have to rely on the daughter you abandoned? As I spoke calmly, my father was speechless. But my mother glared at me with wide eyes. "Jessica, how can you say that? We're family, we should support each other. You're just shocked because we haven't seen each other in so long, right? Don't worry. From now on, we'll live together, and we can adapt to each other's pace." That's a joke. Absolutely not, I refuse. I don't want to talk to you ever again. Please leave. I reflexively said that when they mentioned living together. Even as my parents started yelling and screaming, my heart remained cold. "Jessica, how can you talk to your parents like that? Hurry up and pack your things. Take us to your house." My parents' words became increasingly rough. Even though I said I didn't want to live together, they intended to barge into my home. It made me chuckle. In fact, it seemed that my expression reflected that sentiment. Somehow, I felt a faint smile forming. "Just as you treated me like I'm not your child, I've never thought of you as parents. To suddenly be told by strangers that we're a family and should live together is nothing but terrifying. Your child is just your son. I want nothing to do with you from now on. I don't even want to be invited to the funeral. I thought to myself, so this is what it means for your blood to boil. My gut was heating up, and it felt like my blood pressure was rising. However, my mind remained calm. It was as if a cool breeze was sweeping through my thoughts. It's something I've thought about for a long time. Cutting ties might be necessary for inheritance issues that might arise in the future, but severing the parent-child relationship would be impossible. However, if I cut ties in practice and simply didn't communicate, that should work. Finally, my parents turned red in the face and started yelling. "What are you doing, acting on your own? Who do you think paid for everything? Daughters have an obligation to help their parents. Do you understand how incredibly ungrateful you sound?" Once again, my parents began to yell, and I could only sigh. I wondered how I could make them understand. Do you seriously think that just by giving money, you can call yourselves parents? My grandmother said it in a calm voice. I thought she was absolutely right. To me, those people weren't parents. Being a parent is a fact, isn't it? That's right. It seemed my grandmother's words didn't reach them. They continued to make incomprehensible claims loudly. My grandmother sighed at their persistently loud and incomprehensible arguments and turned on her heel. My parents were still shouting. At that moment, I suddenly heard a police siren getting louder and louder. I wondered if there had been an accident, but the car stopped in front of my grandmother's house. Police officers got out of the car, and there was a crowd of people around the patrol car. Even in this rural area, if a loud argument like this happened, the neighbors would notice it quickly. It seemed they had called the police thinking it was a major incident. Despite being in the countryside, my parents seemed greatly flustered by the appearance of the police. They put on unnaturally friendly smiles and stammered in their responses. When I explained to the police that my parents left with only my older brother, and today, for the first time in 20 years, they said they want to live together, the people around us started to murmur. My parents glared at me, but their response seemed to make the situation more believable. The police officers kept my parents away and, in the meantime, we closed the front door and locked all the doors. As expected, my parents didn't come to the house afterward. I heard from the neighbors that my seemingly nice parents had a conversation with the police for a while, and then they left as if nothing had happened. After that, several days passed, but there was no sign of my parents. It seems that even the neighbors are keeping an eye out, but it seems that the two of them haven't come near this area. Could it be that they just came to visit me as a last resort? I had to return home before the vacation ended, and I had relaxed a little. When a visitor came to my grandmother's house again. "Hey, long time no see, Jessica. Big brother." A man with a sun-kissed tan and long hair, casually tied up, stood there. I realized at his mouth when he called my name and smiled. Standing at the entrance was my brother, who had gone missing just a while ago and hadn't been heard from for several years. I brought my brother into the living room and listened to the details. While interacting with various people in college, my brother became aware of our parents' abnormality and had been patiently waiting for an opportunity to escape from that house while working part-time. He had accumulated enough funds, and when the time was right, he left the country. His goal was to see various people and various parts of the world. While traveling around the world, he worked locally, and he said he took many photos. When he posted those photos on social media, a publishing company contacted him, asking if he wanted to open a photography shop. He accepted the offer in exchange for them providing him with photography jobs, and that's why he had returned to the States after several years. "When I was in Rome, I happened to see you on the news, Jessica." "Oh, from when I won the award?" "Yeah, that's right. You mentioned Grandma in the interview, didn't you?" "I came back to the States because I wanted to see Grandma, but I also wanted to meet you, Jessica. So, I asked Grandma for your whereabouts. It worked out perfectly." My brother laughed cheerfully, but then he straightened up and looked at me seriously. "Jessica, I'm really sorry for everything up until now." "Huh? Why are you saying this all of a sudden?" "It's not sudden. I've been wanting to apologize to you every time I saw you." My brother wasn't smiling at all. I didn't really think much about it back then when we were living together in that house. We didn't have meals together, and on holidays, I was the only one our parents would take out. Even though there was an obvious difference in the clothes we wore, I didn't find it strange. I was just focused on my studies, and during that time, I thought we were just normal siblings who played together. He said, furrowing his brows and clenching his hands on his knees, shaking his head. When I mentioned having a sister to the people in my college seminar, sharing stories from our past, they were all shocked. That's when I finally realized that you had every reason to resent me. I should have gone to apologize immediately after leaving home. I shouldn't have procrastinated until a time like this. I'm sorry for living carefree while you were going through a tough life. He lowered his gaze. I really should have gone to apologize as soon as I left home. But I'm sorry I put it off until now. I'm sorry that I thought it was normal for you to live a normal life when you were going through such a hard time. His heartfelt apology made me consider resenting my brother for the first time. However, I couldn't summon any negative feelings towards him. I didn't harbor thoughts like why only me or why just my brother. At that time, I was preoccupied with our parents to the point where those thoughts rarely crossed my mind. I'm not angry, and I don't resent you. Back then, you were the only one who really talked to me. I said. My brother's face contorted in a pained expression upon hearing these words. As tears welled up in my brother's eyes, our grandmother approached with mittened hands holding a plate. Would you both like to have some candied sweet potatoes? It was my grandmother's homemade candied sweet potatoes. Made from the ones she had harvested from her garden and prepared since yesterday. Knowing this, I couldn't help but smile at my grandmother's deliberate attempt to recreate the atmosphere of the past, as if we had returned to those days. Wow, this brings back memories. I really want to eat some. Yeah, Grandma's candied sweet potatoes are delicious, aren't they? I loved them when I was a kid. I know. Please have as much as you want. Let's enjoy them together. Sitting across from each other at the table for the first time in a long time, we both indulged in the same dish. Just that simple act brought tears to our eyes. Despite the slightly salty taste, it was a precious moment. Afterwards, I learned that our parents had to bear a significant amount of compensation and had further scandals that made headlines, ultimately losing their jobs. Currently, they seem to be living a modest life, working alongside people they once looked down upon due to their lower educational backgrounds. They had to humble themselves before younger supervisors with only high school diplomas. It must have been a humiliating experience, but I believed it was a necessary lesson for them. My brother and I, who had been separated for 20 years, began to frequently communicate, share meals, and visit our grandmother's house together. I was truly happy to spend time with my brother as a family. Grateful for the moments we shared with our grandmother, my brother, and me, I felt content in both my personal and public life.